Hey everyone. Today, we're going to tackle a massive question, but we're going to do it in a really specific way. We're not looking at faith or scripture. Instead, we're going to follow a path of pure logic, an argument that claims it can reason its way all the way to the existence of God. It's a pretty fascinating chain of thought, so let's break down exactly how it works, step by step.
So, where does it all begin? Well, it starts with maybe the most fundamental question you can possibly ask. Why is there anything at all? Why is there a universe, stars, planets, us, instead of just nothing? Thinkers have been wrestling with this one for centuries, and for this argument, it's the ultimate launchpad.
Now, before you can even try to answer a question that big, this line of reasoning says we have to lay down a ground rule first. We need to build a solid foundation, and that foundation rests on the whole idea of what it means to be rational. The idea that for something to make sense, to be intelligible, it's got to have an explanation.
Okay, let's walk through this logic. Step 1 is pretty intuitive, right? To understand something means you have an explanation for it. Step 2 just applies that to the universe. It's either a totally random, unsolvable mystery, or there's some reason for it. Step 3 is the key move. It says that a rational person has to reject the idea that the universe is just nonsense. We're wired to look for answers. And from that, the argument lands on step 4. The only truly rational stance is to believe that the universe does have an explanation. All right, so if we're on board with the idea that the universe must have an explanation, the next obvious question is, what kind of explanation are we even talking about? Well, according to this argument, every single explanation for anything ever can be neatly sorted into one of just 3 categories. Think of this as our analytical toolbox.
Let's break these tools down. First up, the scientific explanation. This is just basic cause and effect. You have some prior conditions, you add some natural laws, and you get an event. A billiard ball moves because it got hit. Simple. Second, you have a personal explanation. This is all about intention. Why is that coffee mug on your desk? Because someone chose to put it there. And third, the essential explanation. This one's a little more abstract. It's when something exists because its very nature demands that it exist. A triangle has to have 3 sides. It's part of its definition.
So now we have our 3 tools, our 3 types of explanation. The argument is now going to apply this toolbox to the biggest question of all, the existence of the entire universe. And the method here is simple. It's a process of elimination. Let's see which one of these, if any, can actually get the job done. All right, let's start with the one that feels most familiar to us. Can a standard scientific explanation that conditions plus laws leads to an event formula, can that explain the existence of literally everything? All matter, all energy, the whole shebang? And the argument comes back with a firm no. The logic here is actually pretty clean. A scientific explanation always needs something to start with. Some stuff, some physical conditions, some laws that were already there. But if you're explaining the entire universe, what could possibly come prior to it? By definition, there's nothing outside of or before the whole thing. So that type of explanation just hits a logical brick wall. Okay, 1 down, 2 to go. Let's check our next tool. Could the universe have an essential explanation? In other words, does the universe exist just because its own nature requires it to exist, the way a triangle's nature requires it to have 3 sides?
And again, the argument says no. It claims the universe just isn't that kind of thing. It's not hard for us to imagine a reality with this specific universe, with our galaxies and our laws of physics, just didn't happen. Its existence doesn't seem to be a logical necessity, baked into its very essence. So, the essential explanation gets ruled out too.
So, this is the pivotal moment in the argument. We started with 3 possible ways to explain things. We've just watched the argument toss out the scientific option and the essential option. And that, by a pure process of logical elimination, forces us toward a pretty dramatic conclusion.
I mean, just pause and think about that for a second. If you've followed the logic so far, and if those first 2 types of explanation are truly off the table for the universe as a whole, what's the only possibility that remains?
And here it is. This is the argument's big finale. The only option left standing is a personal explanation. After eliminating the other 2, the argument concludes that the universe must exist because a conscious agent with intention chose for it to exist.
But it doesn't stop there. It makes one last connection. Step 1 basically says, look, what kind of personal agent could create an entire universe out of nothing? An act of that scale, that power. Well, the only being that would fit that description is, by definition, God.
And if you accept that premise, then the final conclusion in step 2 becomes, in the argument's view, unavoidable. A rational person should believe that God exists.
So let's just trace that path one more time. We started with a simple idea. It's rational to look for an explanation. We sorted all explanations into 3 types. We then argued that 2 of them couldn't possibly apply to the whole universe, and that left us with only one possibility, a personal agent so powerful it could only be called God. It's presented as a pure logical ladder, from a simple premise to a profound conclusion.
And that's the argument. We've just laid out its structure. But it leaves all of us with a really fascinating and much better question to think about. An argument can be perfectly logical, right? Each step can flow flawlessly from the one before it. But does that guarantee the conclusion is actually true? Well, that all depends on whether you accept the premises it started with. And that is something worth reflecting on. Thanks for joining me.